And now, without further ado, I'm really proud to introduce our speakers today. So we have Jon Tayer, who's the president and CEO of the Boulder Chamber, and Scott Sternberg. Sorry,
Yep.
not close. Yes, Sternberg is the executive director at the Boulder Economic Council and associate vice president for the Economic Vitality. And here I've got my Boulder Together cube here.
Yay!
There as a prop. Thank
Lovely.
you, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think what I'm going to do, Sally, is I'm going to, if I can share my screen. I'm Jon Tayer, and I know so many of you from community activities, from business relationships. So I just will say hello, and just like all of you, we're looking forward to getting together in person and enjoying just a 3D version of our relationships. But I just am very thankful that we were invited to speak today. It's I would say, pivotal period for our community, for our economy, as we start to transition into what we hope will be a post-COVID period. And so, that will be the focus of our work. For those who don't know, and just a little background on the Boulder Chamber, we are what we say, the number one support partner for business interests. And what does that mean? That means that we are the central focus area for building business relationships and business partnerships. We are the advocacy voice for business interests, often at the local level, but it's state and federal policy issues that impact business needs in our community. We're out there advocating for them. And then finally, but certainly not least, we are the economic vitality authority for our community. Many times, economic development agencies are separate from a chamber organization. We fortunately have it all under one umbrella. So that's the background for the Boulder Chamber. But again, as I mentioned, today we're going to be focused on Boulder's economic picture. That was what we were asked to present on, and it's quite timely for that. And Scott Sternberg and I, who we'll get the chance to introduce here in just a sec, came up with a title, Fortune, because we live in a wonderful community that has a solid economic base. Misfortune, because as we all know, it's been a very, very challenging period. And so with that, what does recovery look like for our community? And we're going to break the presentation down. Oh, for some reason, I'm on the back end of my presentation. Sorry, everybody. These are rookie Zoom mistakes right here. Let me just get to that. There we go. So the way the presentation outline will go today, and we're going to be very respectful of time so that we have plenty of opportunity for conversation. But first, my partner, Scott Sternberg, will walk us through just the basics of the Boulder economic landscape, and then what were the impacts that we experienced from the pandemic, just to give a foundation. We'll then talk about what are some of the needs associated with our businesses as a result, in order to help lift them, and then what we're doing at the Boulder Chamber associated with that recovery effort. And you see that I referenced the Boulder Economic Council. That is the economic vitality arm of the Boulder Chamber. That is how the organization which drives our economic initiatives. And the individual who leads that effort is Scott Sternberg, who came to us amidst the pandemic from a wonderful background in startup businesses, research science, and then also leading large companies in our community. And so he has a tremendous background of experience that he brings to this job. And also, as you guys will get to know him through this presentation, but I think in person over time, it's a wonderful person. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it off then to my partner here, Scott, and he'll take us through those first two parts of our presentation outline.
Well, great, Jon, and thanks for the kind words, and great to virtually meet all of you. You know, I am a member of a cohort that has been onboarded in a dream job, albeit in two dimensions, and, you know, physically and let's say metaphorically, that third dimension is depth. So I look forward to not only seeing the third dimension in all of you, but also getting to know you a little bit more as our relationship and our network grow in those dimensions. So as Jon said, the Boulder Economic Council is the economic vitality arm of the Boulder Chamber. Just a bit of background, we have roughly 60 investors that form a network where we invest in initiatives that are important to the city and to the community writ large. We do that through signature events, but we also do that by compiling a lot of information and data and reporting and reaching out to the community, such as what we're doing today, to essentially give as much basic economic information to the stakeholders that we can, so we can make informed decisions and we're all literally on the same page. And I can't think of a more important function to perform than it has been in the last year or so, as we are all struggling with trying to understand our condition and understand how we're going to recover. So hopefully here in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll give you a background of the before, during, and after aspects of what we've experienced over the past year. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. I will start by just putting two resources for you all into the chat here. There are two links, one to what we call our BEC quarterly economic indicators. You're free to click on that website and check out some of the data that I'm going to be showing today. And then more importantly, we do an annual market study, which is the second link in there that shows a little bit of the demographics, the quality of life, and certainly the economic and business equation that we celebrate here in Boulder. So if you want further information, I suggest you click onto those sites. They're rich with as up-to-date information as we can get. Just as an overview here, Jon and I thought it would be good to kind of identify a couple sectors that we are certainly watching and have been watching. And I would say prior to the pandemic really fueled the economic vitality equation of Boulder. We here in the city are about 108 or 9,000 or so individuals. And you'll also recognize further down that we have roughly the same amount of jobs. We certainly had the 100,000 jobs and resident equation prior to the pandemic. So as we've grown a little bit and as the pandemic has nipped out a handful of jobs, we're now just slightly underemployed. But that's an unusual statistic for 100% of the residents who are working in jobs to one match nearly. We are an intellect-driven community. We routinely appear as #1 on the Bloomberg Brain Concentration Index, and yes, there is such a thing as a brain concentration index. It measures things like attainment of degrees and working in STEM fields and so on and so forth. So I think just suffice it to say we're a very interconnected and intellectual community that we interact with here in Boulder. You know, our economy is mixed in a very favorable way. We have a lot of industries that cover a lot of sectors, and I'll show a couple of those here in a second. But we're also mixed in terms of what we call primary and secondary employers. So about 7,000 companies call Boulder their home. 700 of those, or about 10%, are what we call primary employers. And those are employers that attain more than 50% of their revenues from outside the community. So whereas a bar and a restaurant, maybe a local retail store is a secondary employer, the Googles, the Apples, the Intel, the IBMs, all of these organizations classify themselves as primary employers. But the interesting statistic for us is 96% of the companies have fewer than 50 people. And what that leads to is a very high density of businesses per capita that we compete nationally with. And so it creates a very interesting economy that has both hedging effects on up and down swings in the economy, as we've seen as of late. And you know, I would say one of the generating horsepower entities within our community is the research and development group that work and thrive here. In part, that's the $631 million that CU Boulder brings in the form of awards and grants, a lot through the National Science Foundation and NASA and these sorts of funding agencies. But least we forget we have the NOAAs and the UCARs and the NIST that surround our community, and they generate about $1.1 billion of economic impact to the community. And that's about half of what the federal laboratory footprint here is in the state of Colorado. So very rich in the R&D sector. And of course, that relates to the brain index that we see here as well. And then I was going to say that part and parcel to that point of 96% of the companies are fewer than 50 employees, we have a very strong innovation economy. We're number 4th amongst our peer organizations in new business formation, in venture capital investments that come into the community, and in what's called SEC Form D filings, which are essentially organizations that are giving up equity to certain owners or new entrants in an effort to grow their businesses without going public or going after venture capital funding. So all of this points to a vibrant community that has a very strong economy that interacts with one another at a very intellectual base. And with that, I'll just go to the next slide and highlight some of those industries that we classify as clusters. I'm sure that anyone who has spent any time in the community recognizes most, if not all, of these sectors and maybe some of these images. But we're very strong in areas like aerospace, biosciences, and IT and software. That is certainly on the technology side, as complemented by a lot of energy companies that qualify into that clean tech sector. We're also very strong, as you might imagine, in the natural products and outdoor recreation, which really speaks to the ethos of the quality of life we enjoy here in Boulder. And lastly, I mentioned the research economy, and these are the areas that we focus on and drive and try to make connections to make sure that we're developing a workforce as well as developing the economy around these clusters. So next slide, John. Well, given that background, and Boulder's economy was booming prior to the pandemic, but the question is, what happened? This is just a graphic. I won't go too deeply into it, but if you can sort of follow it left to right, the public health crisis created an economic hardship. Not only did it create a social distancing phenomenon, but then also pushed a lot of us out remotely. One of the things that came to our rescue was this rapid rate of digital adoption, as evidenced by this call and as evidenced by all of the digital technologies that have come to assist remote working, remote learning, and of course has changed our purchasing behavior in so many different ways. And then in addition, obviously the social distancing has had serious limitations around hospitality, events, fitness and recreation, and so on. And so this is a model that we've used to try to understand how we're going to recover. And at the end of the presentation, you'll see how we envision the future. One of the things we want to point out, though, in the middle there is it has amplified a digital divide and economic inequities within our community and differential healthcare aspects that were, I would say, nascent to our community. But the pandemic clearly shed a lot of light on how that aspect of our community has been struggling. And that's one of the areas that we're working on going forward, as John will speak to in a second. So just to quickly show what this created, previously we were about 200,000 jobs, and this is Boulder County-wide now. That has dropped off by about 15,000 now. And you can see the sharp decline and then the slow recovery that we're experiencing here in terms of the number of jobs that we have in the county. If you look at the reverse of that, if you will, and look at the unemployment rate, clearly back in the early part of the pandemic, we were pushing 10, 12% of unemployment, if not higher, and then have come down, but certainly have not come down to pre-pandemic levels. And so the net of this slide is that, we went through a very rapid transition, as we all know, and have yet to recover. It remains to be seen how well we'll recover in the next year and beyond. So a couple of other associated things that we look at is certainly the commercial real estate market. It's no surprise probably to you that office vacancies are up. A lot of us are working from our homes, and a lot of us will probably never return to those offices, as we've been hearing many businesses discuss here. So one of the indicators we're looking at is to see how the commercial real estate market will reset itself and possible opportunities to recreate office space across the warehouse, office, and retail sectors here. So again, you can look at these indicators in more detail on the links that I'm left into the video. Next slide there, John. Yeah. And one of the things to point out is Colorado is a really attractive state for remote workers. So this organization, Career Cloud, looks at things like the types of jobs and access to internet and a number of factors. And Colorado rates second, i.e. this is a great place to be if you can work from your house. And you can get a job and you can get high access to bandwidth. And so this is an indicator that perhaps will change the nature of Colorado. As you know, many people have been moving into the state, now there's even more of an impetus to move in, given the fact that we are so attractive for residents to be working outside of the state. And of course, for us, that has an economic impact in terms of residents working outside of the state that we're also. So then, just to sum up this section, again, this graphic has created some interesting thoughts. And if you look to the right here, you can kind of see where certain trends, as an organization called McKinsey is looking. The black dot is where we were prior to the pandemic, objectively speaking. The light blue is at the peak of the pandemic, and the dark blue is where we expect to be relatively to before the pandemic. So just to go through these, work from home was at a certain level, certain amount of people were working from home. We all moved to working from home. But what we anticipate is not necessarily coming all the way back to zero, where we'll have a residual part of the workforce working from home. And that's the logic as you look at all of these. And you can see that what we are really looking at, with the exception, I would say, of leisure travel, we expect leisure travel to come back at about the same rate as it was before, that we will have a residual effect and an amplification of the trends that existed pre-pandemic. And so what we've done is not only understood our local economy, looked at the metrics and have been tracking them over time, looking at more of the macroscopic trends that we see as evident here, and put them into a program where we're trying to get grassroots feedback and information from the community as to how we can best recover. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jon to talk about the Boulder Together program. But one thing I want to leave you with that's going to be a red thread throughout everything that we talk about is the social inequity that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. The red line here are essentially the unemployment drop or the employment drop, if you will, of the income cohort that makes less than $50,000. And so even now, a year on to the pandemic, that aspect of our community, or that strata of our community, has yet to recover. Whereas for those folks who have been making $75,000 or more a year, the pandemic and the economic impact has been relatively small and has all recovered already. And so this is a very stark warning for us that we have these inequities in our community, and that's part of what we have been thinking about in the recalibration of the Boulder Together program that you'll hear now from Jon. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jon Tayer.
Great, thanks, Scott. And I'm going to keep going. I'm sure there's some questions for Scott, but why don't we hold on those? I'll move through the next section and hopefully generate some additional thoughts. So where we start in terms of thinking about how do we respond to this circumstance. First of all, as we say, our day job is to work through economic vitality principles and general business support efforts that Scott leads through the Boulder Economic Council. But we have another program through the Boulder Chamber called Boulder Together. And as we say, the Boulder Together is bringing leadership, business leadership, together with community collaboration to address the greatest challenges in our community. And I will say that ironically, the greatest challenge prior to COVID was that we had such a supercharged economy that the existential threat for our businesses, for our economic future, was the attraction and retention of a workforce that could fill the jobs that we had in our local businesses. Because if our employers can't find the talent here in our community or surrounding area, then the risk is that they will need to move to other locations to satisfy that need. So we were through Boulder Together, and I appreciate Sally with her cube. It's an indication of investment in Boulder Together, because we have great business group that are driving this program. We were initially focused wholly on workforce development, trying to identify pools of talent that would be available to support our workforce or our businesses, on additional workforce housing in our community, and on investment in regional infrastructure, roadways, transportation infrastructure that allowed for commuting convenience in and out of Boulder. That was the focus. But we know that circumstances dramatically changed as a result of COVID, and Scott walked us through some of those. And so we set out to make sure we understood what that circumstances were. And the first part of that effort was significant business outreach. We say we had, and this is actually a little bit undervalued, we had 30 plus roundtables with business leaders. We've met with over 500 business individuals, folks in all shapes of industries across our community, to understand what were the circumstances that they were facing, what support did they need, and what kind of anticipated long-term investment and support did they see for their industry in order to help them recover from the effects of COVID-19. So a significant outreach through our Boulder Together program to touch base and ground truth much of the data that Scott described. So we can track the numbers, but we wanted to know individually by industry sector what were the specific needs that our businesses had. Well, the result was enormous in terms of getting a sense of just the challenges that our businesses were facing. And you see everything from just resources, PPE, still a challenge. How do you appropriately protect your workforce and the knowledge of that? Their employees and workforce, still there are challenges with the business sector in accessing the talent that they need. Everything from, listen, when schools were closed, childcare was a significant issue, but it continues to be a challenge for our businesses. Telecommunications equipment and productivity and teleworking. Business operations, there were many breakdowns in supply chain and all sorts of technology disruptions that our businesses were facing as a result of COVID. And then there were just generally community-wide challenges. And, I note that there is the DE&I, diversity in the workplace, an element of that, and equity around job access and workforce talent. So things through a wide spectrum. And this is just a pared down list, I will note. This, in order to get on this list, it had to have been mentioned multiple times across different industry sectors. I can tell you that there's a whole nother list of issues that we're working on, which are relevant maybe to one specific industry. But we can't do it all. And in many cases, the Boulder Chamber isn't the appropriate group to work on it. Some of these things are being addressed through other agencies, government, civic organizations. So what we ultimately did as an organization was pare it down and say, okay, well, what is it that the Boulder Chamber can focus on, and what should be the character of our effort on behalf of the economic recovery? And that's where we talk about focusing on a strong, and we say inclusive, economic recovery. Strong because we had to get to work on it literally starting last April, starting to think about what was the impact and changes to our economy that we were seeing, and what did we anticipate going forward. And inclusive because we recognize, as Scott so well pointed out, that the impacts of COVID, just as the health impacts have been disparate, they have been disparate in terms of the impacts on small businesses, on BIPOC populations. The economic impacts have been very, very much distinguished, where you see that the lower income populations have suffered most greatly during this as a result of this crisis. So we wanted to make sure that our economic recovery efforts were broad-based and inclusive, and of course, that we put our full weight behind them. So what then does that look like in terms of the structure of our economic recovery efforts? Well, it breaks down into three different areas, and some of it hasn't changed dramatically, but the character of it has. So first of all, we are still very focused on workforce development. Now, the circumstances are different. It's not that we have full employment and all of a sudden, we're just desperate to find folks who are available. We, as Scott pointed out, we have a higher unemployment rate. In fact, the suspicion is that the unemployment rate may be even higher for folks in the surrounding area that generally work in Boulder because they report their unemployment in other counties. So we know that there is additional talent pool out there that is available to fill jobs that are still open in industries that are thriving in our community. Think biotech, think aerospace. All of those industries are desperate for staffing, including even our restaurants now looking for talent. So our first part of workforce development is to identify what are those needs. So the research, the education, the effort to make sure we understand the skills that are needed. We then are going to pull together the partnerships, and we've already started doing this with everything from the University of Colorado to our community colleges to our workforce development center, the Workforce Boulder County. All of those are partners with the Boulder Chamber in helping to build programs that help to develop the talent that then can work in our industry. And then we start with the implementation of programming that directly ties the available workforce to the job. So it means taking somebody who may have been in a waiter for many years, lost that opportunity in the service sector, but they have great talents and easily through a little bit of training can then be a perfect candidate for a very lucrative and beneficial career in biotech or some other industry. The second area of focus continues to be one element of community infrastructure, but then we add another. So the first is we continue to have mobility needs. Now, our little joke going around the Boulder Chamber was that, through COVID, we solved the traffic problem because you just don't have the same kind of commuters into town. Well, you know what? They're coming back. And we need to be ready for that commuting back into Boulder, making sure that it is as convenient and efficient and environmentally sensitive as possible. So we are going to make sure that we are positioning our community to receive those infrastructure dollars that we know are coming, to make sure that they are available to our projects and investing in our community in roadway investments, in transit, et cetera, all the things that are going to make it more convenient for commuters in and out of our community. And then second, high-speed internet access. And I always joke that, this is the moment that my computer goes down because it hears me talking about this, but we all know from the challenges that we face in our small businesses, our different employment sectors of our community, that it's difficult to access and expensive to access broadband internet. And we can't have that because we know that small businesses now need to have both brick and mortar, but also strong online shopping in order to be strong. And we also know that we need to have all of our workforce have the capacity to access their work through the internet. So we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure and the programs in place that make it accessible and affordable high-speed internet service. That's going to be a major focus for us in our community and for the Boulder Together effort. And then finally, a quality business environment. And this is something that I think is, I've talked to some of our business leaders and they'll say, finally, we're talking about quality business environment. And, I will say that for too long, our community has taken for granted a strong economy and the benefits that we've enjoyed from it. But I think now when you start to recognize that we're losing the sales tax base because of the depression that we faced in our economy due to COVID, folks are making that connection and recognizing that we want a strong and healthy environment. We need strong social programs, but we also need a vital economy. So we're going to make sure to communicate that message and be clear about the needs of our economy as we go forward so that we can continue to have that as an equal balanced partner in what makes up a healthy community. And part of that work continues to be that we need additional workforce housing. We can't have it be that a housing project that's going to support our diverse workforce is not is going to have to wait 3, 4, 5 years to get through, because that just adds costs to the project, which then means that ultimately it's a more expensive housing development, and that makes it less affordable to our diverse workforce. So we need to make sure, as part of an inclusive recovery, that we're getting that housing out there. And then finally, commercial development flexibility. When you think about some of our small businesses and the challenges that they face, and the new focus on health protection, also the recognition that maybe they don't need as much space as they had before. They can't wait around a year, 2 years to get a permit from the city to move a wall or to put in a new sink or something like that. They'll be out of business by the time they get that permit. So we are working very closely with our partners in the city of Boulder to push forward faster and more efficient permitting processes for our small businesses as well as our large businesses. I'll tell you, as we start to see our economy recover, larger businesses are making decisions that are more focused on the economic equation. And if Boulder is a place where they can't get a permit for their redevelopment in 2-3 years, they may make a decision to move and grow outside of our community. And we see that happen. That's a normal part of the economic process, but we can't have it happen on a regular basis, especially when we need to have strong economic recovery for everybody. So that's the focus of our Boulder Together economic recovery efforts. And it's going to be a monumental effort. It's absolutely critical that we bring back our economy so that we can make sure that we have jobs, that we make sure that we have our sales tax revenue, and that all ultimately contributes to, as the Boulder Chamber says, we build community through business. So strong businesses is what makes this a thriving community. So I think that covers the equation for us in terms of the formal presentation. But want to now open it up and hear thoughts from our fellow friends in the Rotary, as well as any questions that you guys have. So I'm going to unshare here.
I've got it, Judge. Well, thank you, John and Scott. Really appreciate all the information. You obviously know your stuff. And if I could just say, your love for our community as well kind of shines through in everything that you've said. So thank you for that. We do have a number of questions. I've got until about 1 o'clock. Does that still work for the two of you?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, let's just start right away with President Sally Brown.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been quite a fascinating presentation. So what do you think about entry-level positions right now? We're just not getting the resumes, and people are not that interested in driving into Boulder for a lower rate. And I don't know that this is true, but I was wondering, it seems that our unemployment insurance is paying a lot of money right now, from what I understand, up to $40,000. And so how does someone compete with that? I mean, how do I get receptionists to come be interested in working when they're getting paid more to be home?
So Scott, do you want me to just take a quick start stab here? Go ahead.
You do, John. I want the answer too.
Exactly. I got it right here in my. So Sally, it's a great question, and I will say this, that it's one that Scott and I talk about a lot. So first of all, very interestingly, there was a significant conversation at the very outset of the pandemic when they were talking about what kind of relief to give to our workforce. And you'll note that in some countries, European countries, it was traditionally the businesses that had control over the wages and the unemployment resources for their staff, so they could keep them connected to the jobs. And the United States took a different approach. They delivered the compensation to the workforce directly. So remember, it was $600, I think, initially, and now it's $300. And certainly there is a theory, and it's not, I would say that nobody knows definitively, that is one of the tempering forces on some of the return to work, and something that is certainly a concern for business interests. We see it happen. I think it's through September that this will be occurring. And so that could be a significant deterrent to employment. But there are other issues at play. A couple that I mentioned. First of all, some workforce members are concerned about coming back to work, just quite frankly. There's in conditions that are in the workplace, let's say a restaurant or even in the office, where folks are still, maybe they're just getting comfortable with the idea that the vaccinations are available, or they are, in fact, themselves waiting to get vaccinated. So that is one dampening effect. And then the truth is, some of the things that we articulated in this Boulder Together program and why it's so absolutely critical, and Sally, you hit right on them, we need to make these investments for the long-term economic health of Boulder. Because if there's a great opportunity to work in a restaurant in your hometown, and maybe they're not paying exactly as much, maybe it's a little bit more you could get in Boulder, but it's an hour commute to get to Boulder, I think the decision becomes pretty easy. So we need to make sure, for the lifeblood of our community, that we provide more available workforce housing options for that workforce, as well as commute options, which then make it more attractive for them to efficiently, conveniently get back and forth into our community. So that's why we're so focused on those elements of our workforce, of the Boulder Together program. So that helps, Sally. Is that?
Okay, great. Thanks, John. And we have a couple more questions on transportation in a few minutes, but for right now, we've got Chad Stam. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mike. John, you just alluded to some of these issues that I want to ask you about, and maybe you can expand upon them a little bit more.
Sure.
But heading into, for the last several years, maybe 5 years, heading into a decade, finding, training, and retaining great labor in restaurants has been extremely difficult. Obviously, things changed when COVID hit. Now things are changing back, and it seems like those challenges are even bigger than they were before. Certainly nationally, for a wide variety of reasons that I don't think we necessarily have to go into here. But are those changes that are happening nationally, those challenges, are they being reflected here in Boulder as well?
Scott, do you want to hit this one first?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to answering that question, and thanks for putting it into the chat and give us a little forewarning on the question there, because I think there's a demand issue, and one of the things that I presented was, things like delivery services and things of that nature have spiked. So restaurants have had to, in particular, had to pivot, tremendously to get forward and to go forward here. And it's anticipated that, yes, we will all go back to dining on site, but there will most likely be a uptick in remote delivery and online delivery services as we've seen, and as we would probably all suspect. So I think there's a demand issue in drawing, that talent. And least we forget, especially in Boulder and in other communities that have major universities, the student population actually serves as a workforce for that particular part of the economy. And so what we've seen over the last year is that the students that have either been here or been quarantined or been, sequestered in many ways, or maybe not even shown up or taken gap years, has had an impact on the available workforce locally here to work a 5 to 10 p.m. shift at a restaurant, for instance, or work a retail shift or things of that nature. So I think you have two elements. One is the demand in terms of pulling these services in the direction, and that is changing with the adoption of technology. And the other is the availability of large-scale workforces like a university presents itself. I would say too, then the more generally, the topic of reskilling the workforce is a major element for us. And as John mentioned, in the Workforce Development Act area under the Boulder Together program, understanding where the jobs will be in the future, and then matching the skill sets and starting to train individuals to match those job opportunities is something that's in just laser sharp focus for the development aspect of Boulder Together.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. And now that we know that you're reading ahead to the test questions, everyone's encouraged to change your question when I go to you and keep Scott guessing. So next one is Kitty. Go right ahead, Kitty.
Well, first off, Scott and John, thank you so much for being here today. And as someone who lives about as far east off of Valmont as you can live and still retain a Boulder address before you hop into Lafayette, the traffic off of Valmont, as you all know, is awful coming into Boulder. If I'm a potential employee, why do I want to come into Boulder and deal with people that want me to ride a bike or want me to be on a bus versus staying somewhere east and working for probably the same amount of money?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer it in a couple of different ways. One is relative to the precise situation that you mentioned, the transportation challenge, and then the second is, why folks would commute into Boulder. So a couple things. So first of all, on the transportation investment side, you see that is a major focus of our efforts around the economic recovery. We have a number of infrastructure corridor investments that we're working with. So in particular, State Highway 7 and 119, that's not specifically Valmont, but the hope is that would help provide some relief off of these ancillary corridors. And I will say this, it's roadway improvements, but it's also transit infrastructure. We have not done a very good job in our community providing convenient transit. We have some pretty reasonable regional routes, but if you're coming in, let's say on the bus from Longmont and it stops at the diagonal, one of the diagonal exits, and you still have a 2-mile hike to get to your place of work, you're not going to use transit. So what we're talking about is, in addition to the infrastructure and the regional service investments, we're also going to be very focused on what's called first and final mile connections, which get folks directly from the bus, dropping them off, pick them right up and take them directly to their place of work. So that is a major focus, another one of the infrastructure side of the equation. But then to answer your question, quite frankly, Kitty, about why folks would make the decision to work in Boulder, and that partly is answered by the dynamic nature of our economy. Boulder has a concentration of industries, as Scott outlined, that are unique to the Front Range, to this area. And those are job opportunities that are not available in the more outlying areas. So our hope is that is one continued draw. But then the truth is that there is going to be some price increase for labor to get folks to come into Boulder. We know that some of our businesses are paying a little bit higher wages to attract that workforce. So it's not perfect, Kitty. Absolutely, but those are sort of, it's both the investment side, but also sort of keeping this an attractive place for workforce to come to. I don't know, Scott, do you have anything else to add to that one?
No, maybe just an anecdote. One of the things that we're hearing in terms of the social impact of remote work is that the younger generation is really antsy to get back into the office environment. And the answer there, or the effect there, is that they really need and desire mentors that are working with them. And so if you're talking about some early career individuals that are looking to advance their career and possibly make a difference, they recognize that they need the interaction with the more, let's say, seasoned career professionals. And so I think that's also going to be a draw, especially for the younger population, the early career folks, to come into Boulder to make sure that they get those one-on-one personal interactions from a mentor-mentee perspective to develop their careers.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we have a very similar question from Paul Cure. Paul, go right ahead.
Mike, I might take your advice and throw them a curveball here.
Oh,
Kitty,
no.
I apologize. They might be coming down Valmont to see our pigs, at the farm. So I apologize. I'm gonna ask Ann to move them off there. Just a quick question for you guys. Thank you so much, as always, for all that you do for our community. What safety net measures are being put in place now, God forbid, for the next pandemic, in the sense of what type of economic piggy banks are we putting in place to protect local businesses another pandemic happens?
So I'm going to take a stab at it, and maybe Scott wants to offer. But first of all, I'll say, Paul, thank you, for your contributions to our community. So looking at you, friend. But I will say this, I will not say that right now we are in a position to be squirreling away resources to prevent against the ensuing pandemic. In fact, the truth is that we're, at the federal level going into deficit, and our businesses are trying to access, and our community trying to access those resources to invest in the things that we need to lift our economy back up. So at this point, from a sort of classic thinking about a rainy day fund or something like that, that's not at what's happening, I would say. But I will tell you that there have been amazing learnings from this experience. And the one that I think is going to hold us in best stead for the future is the amazing collaboration that we have seen in our community across the health sector and across the economic sector. Our health partners, the Boulder County Public Health Department, in conjunction with all of our health providers, were a model for, and I look at my friends at Boulder Community Health, who one of them I know is online, but just a model for how they help to make sure that we were responding to the immediate crisis, but also, just as importantly, available to serve regular health needs. I mean, it was, not everybody had COVID, but some folks were suffering from other quite serious illness. Our public health alliance was incredibly strong and effective, and I think that those team members who are part of that effort. But then in addition, we as an economic team developed an alliance, and I'm talking about the Small Business Development Center, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the city's economic vitality team, the Latino Chamber, the downtown Boulder. We met on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, working through challenges, thinking of creative solutions for our businesses, and that energy we are committed to continuing through the recovery, and now I'd say through normal behavior activities, so that we're prepared now as insurance for the future to lift our economy if we ever face a similar kind of incident. Scott, do you have anything to add on that front?
I know we're pushing up on the hour here. I just like to leave with, I said early on that when it pertains to leadership, business operations, social issues, so on and so forth, health-related issues, there's really no book on how to manage in a pandemic. I think what Jon just said is that there's probably going to be a hell of a lot of books that are written around how to manage during a pandemic. So, I think experience is the best teacher in all of those dimensions going forward. So we can recover a lot faster and be more aware of what perhaps is coming in the future.
Great, thank you. And President Sally just gave me a couple or more minutes. Does that work for Jon and Scott? Can you guys stay a few more minutes? You have to run. Okay, great, because I'm going to try to get through a couple more questions if possible. Marty, go right ahead.
We understand that some of the businesses in our community have left because of the increased cost of rent. Is there anything that is happening or can happen that would keep folks here and help the small business owner?
I can take a quick stab at that one, Jon, not to be too verbose, but essentially one of the functions of the Boulder Chamber and the Boulder Economic Council and Economic Vitality is strong retention activities. So first and foremost, what we want to make sure is that every business of every scope and size, scale, and industry understands that they're part of the community and they have access to the resources that are in that community. And so that's part of what the Chamber, and specifically I focus on, is to ensure that we're reaching out to these organizations. There have been traditional tax rebate incentive programs to maintain businesses here in Boulder, primarily designed around how to expand in place, so to speak, and provide tax incentives as they grow to retain their businesses here. And then I would say there's a cadre of federal and state programs that are grant-based, that are designed to sort of ease the pain in the short term, either through local grants, loans, and then possibly forgiveness of those loans to ensure that these businesses can bridge now going forward. And then lastly, what I'll say is that I think in the commercial real estate market, there's a lot of investments with the owners of the buildings and the brokers to understand that short-term negotiations could lead to long-term tenancy, and making sure that the decisions that we make now will keep the businesses here, and then that both parties are incentivized to do that. So along all those fronts, I would say that there's a lot of activity going forward at the large, all the way down to the smaller businesses to retain those businesses.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Marty, I actually, I don't know how many folks saw it, but last Sunday, I wrote on behalf of the chamber a piece about affordable commercial. And interestingly, when they talk about high rents, right now, property tax and other expenses, aside from the actual underlying rent, are going up faster than rent. And it would be something like $16 a square foot for the space, and then $12 per square foot for property tax and other incidental expenses. And so one of the areas of focus, aside from all the things that Scott mentioned, is to target that property tax to see that, in particular for smaller businesses, if there's a way to help abate some of that, to provide some direct funding support to help them to address that element of the hurdle. Because as property values go up, we're seeing that number just continue to rise exponentially, and it is a concern for us. But it's one of the elements of I added to the tool chest of things that Scott mentioned.
Great, thank you. And sadly, we are out of time. I know that there were a couple more people, Meryl and Nancy Chin Wagner, but I told them that they could just call you at home personally later on. And you know both of them, so.
Nancy does anyway, yeah.
And so that being said, I know John and Lena would have something they'd like to say to you as well.
Well, okay. So Scott, I haven't had a chance to meet you in person yet, but I've known Jon Tayer for many, many years. And what I would want to say, as half of the responder, Len and I are both responding to this amazing program you put on. But, I have been a member of the Boulder Chamber for over 40 some years now, and actually served as president of the board a number of years ago. And John, I just want to say how proud I am of the work that the Boulder Chamber and the Economic Council has done, particularly in this very difficult year. I think we all recognize the importance of the business community in our Boulder community. And one of the things that I have loved working in our business community is because it is part of the community. And everything that the business community is trying to do is to support the community at large. And that came through in your presentation just very, very well today. So thank you both very much. And I'm going to turn it over to my better half, who we're in Florida visiting our grandchildren, and she'll say a few words.
Well, John, I know you've spoken to Rotary a number of times, so you're well aware that for more than 35 years, Rotary has been involved and instrumental in the campaign to wipe polio off the face of the earth. And as a founding member of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, we've been instrumental in seeing cases of polio decline by more than 99.9%. And in fact, there have only been 2 cases of wild polio virus this year, one in Afghanistan and one in Pakistan. So to thank you for speaking with us today, and in recognition of the great job that you have done keeping our community strong during this pandemic, we are going to be donating 100 doses of vaccine to the Rotary Polio Eradication Campaign. So thanks very much. Great to see you. Thank you both.
Thank you, guys. You're wonderful community and business leaders, and friends. So I'm glad you're in Florida, but thank you so much for those kind words and the contribution. It's an honor.
All right, thank you so much, Scott and John. That was a wonderful presentation. We appreciate all your time and being here with us. And as Lena said, we appreciate you trying to help keep us gelled together as a community during this really tough year.
Pleasure.